Well, our next guest has served in many roles, so I'm just going to cherry pick a few of them. He is the chair of Hope Media. He was for 15 years CEO of Christian Schools Australia. He was sitting on the front bench as a member of the Liberal Party in the New South Wales Legislative Assembly in portfolios of education, community service and treasury. And last but certainly not least, I'm sure, he is musical director of the Hornsby Concert Band. Stephen O'Doherty, a big welcome to you and thank you for coming on the Animated Living podcast.
Hello, Ian. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you. So about 3 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, I decided to stop full-time work. And I suppose you'd say, are you retired? Well, kind of. I do a lot of things now and I don't get paid. So if that's retirement, I don't think it is. I don't know that you ever really retire. But changing from full-time paid work to a situation where I was doing boards and choirs and helping, and I'm mentoring several folk, and that transition period was very difficult. And very often it's good for us to have mentors to take us through that transition to the next stage of life. I think you and I are both in that stage of life, and perhaps some people listening today are in that stage of life of one season coming to an end and a new one starting. And for a while, you kind of kick around the house wondering not just what you're going to do, but who you are.
Yeah.
Because we construct ourselves so often by what we do in work. Well, I'm an accountant, I'm a journalist, I'm a whatever it is. And this is a really interesting case study, now that I think of it. Thank you for prompting this. So today I was interpreting the public health order and communicating it out to the various members of this roundtable organisation that I represent. And sometimes that involves reading black letter law legislation. Sometimes it involves trying to re-understand the way departments have communicated interpreted the black letter law into plain English. Often it involves hearing people's concerns. Oh, the public health order says this, but someone told me that, and helping to go back to the authorities and clarify it for them and then re-communicate it. Suddenly I realised I'm doing all the things that I was trained to do.
Yes.
I'm being a journalist again. I'm being a member of parliament again, because guess what? That's what members of parliament do. We as an MP, I was a legislator. I wasn't trained in being a legislator. I learned it on the job. You've got to be a legislator if you're an MP to read and amend legislation. So suddenly I'm doing all of those things again and using skills that I haven't used for a while. And I realized the rest of all of those things were a preparation for this. And if you can think of the things you've done in the past as a preparation for what you can bring now to contribute to the lives and the well-being of others, I think that'll put you in a great place.
Yes.
Most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it sad talking to some of my peers who still, even in their 50s, are feeling stuck in their workplace. It's very sad. And I think, well, what's ahead? Is retirement the goal here?
When I got to about 57, I was on 5-year rolling contracts. And I sat down with the chairman of the board I was working to at the time. And they said, what you look anticipating for the next 5 years? Will you be going for another 5-year contract or not? And that was a really important wake-up question. He did me a huge favour by asking me that question, because it allowed me to think of the things that I wanted to achieve. This was an organisation I had set up, and I'd had 3 contracts. I'd worked there 15 years. What would the next 5 years bring? It was well established. It was on its way. We'd been through some crises. We'd solved some problems. We'd pointed in the right direction, away we're going. And I had to realize that I was more of a builder than a sustainer. Sustaining something is probably not active enough for me. I want to reform, change, build, grow. I mean, you can grow organizations, but I think I had done my thing. And I didn't want to just sit there and sustain for the next 5 years, but there were a whole bunch of other projects that I was at that stage involved in outside of the workplace. Christian Media was one of them, where I where I saw the need for growth and change, legislative change in some cases, and other kinds of changes. And I thought, well, if I stay here, then I'm going to miss some of the more productive years of the next stage of my life in something that I might not be fully in love with, and miss the opportunity to invest in these other areas. So I said, no, I'm not going to go for another contract. I think I'll go and do these other things. But in doing that, it opened up a whole new world of possibilities.
Yes, yes. And so often, if we just stay with what we consider safe and stay within the bounds of that, we are selling ourselves way short. It's much better to take that step when we get the nudge and trust, even if there's an unsettling period of transition, which normally there is. Things, as you say, do open up in ways that you never imagined. In fact, Steve and I have someone coming on this podcast very soon. I'm not sure if it'll be the one after this or the one after that, but a fellow who was in corporate work high up in the ANZ Bank for a number of years, who decided to leave. And we're going to talk about his process of leaving and what he's doing now, and the emotions that he went through, and how his identity was wrapped up in his role. Many of the things we're talking about now. So that's an episode to look out for in the coming weeks, because it is entirely relevant.
It was very sobering, Ian, to me. I'm just patting my dog here so that she doesn't make any more noise. She's been barking at a bird outside the window. It was sobering for me to realise, when I was doing some work on similar issues, community health issues, that self-harm has two big peaks for men: young people and older people. So self-harm in older ages for men is a very real issue in our society.
Yes, yes. And
what I've just done is an antidote to it, by the way. I've noticed there's a bird outside the window. I've noticed the dog wants to bark at it. I look outside and I see that the jonquils are growing. These simple pleasures.
There's a whole piece, I think, around that word consider. You know, what does it mean to consider? And the first thing you need to do is stop. You know, if we're always racing, always going, it's sometimes, well, often in the stopping. And COVID has afforded us an opportunity to stop, perhaps in ways that we haven't before.
Yes.
Now, whether we will lay hold of what we learned last year and take it with us this year and next year remains to be seen. But the gift of stopping, of noticing, of appreciating, of being grateful, these are things that bring life. I'm interested in the hurly-burly of 10 years as a politician. Did you get the opportunity to stop? Did you have that rhythm of busyness and rest, particularly as a musician and as someone who obviously had a heart and a wiring for the arts? Did you have opportunity to express that in that 10 years of life, or did all of that go on hold?
Gosh, that's such a good question. When I was first elected, I stopped conducting school bands, something I'd do, and I had school and community bands that I'd been doing since I was 15. When I was elected, and we had a new baby, our first child was 6 months old when I was first elected. It all became a bit much, and I stopped all musical activity. And a couple of years later, I just realized I had to start it again, because I was less of me than I had been previously. And I didn't think I just wasn't feeling whole. So I went back to conducting school and community bands. In fact, that's when I started doing the band that I referred to earlier in this conversation at a school that went on for a long period of time. And that was very grounding. It was wonderful to be back with, my own kids were at school, at the same school, so there was that. It allowed me to be involved in the life of that school in ways that other parents sometimes weren't. It meant that I had to change schedules and make sacrifices, and I couldn't always be there. Like, you understand, when the parliament is sitting and you've got to be there, you've got to be there. In the earlier days of my parliamentary life, there was a hung parliament in New South Wales. So every single vote was critical, and often we wouldn't rise, the House wouldn't rise till 3 or 4 in the morning.
Yeah, you
Well, the member
needed
for
to
Manly,
depend.
your area, and others
Yeah, that's right.
made trouble.
The three independents, remember that? Yeah, Peter
I
McDonald.
remember them very well, and your mate Peter McDonald, he used to make trouble for the government, and that meant that I had to stay there till 4 in the morning until the House rose. And when you don't see your children, it's awful. It's just awful. And I feel so much for MPs who are in that position. I was fortunate in that I went home every night to my own house, most nights. Occasionally I'd sleep on the sofa in my room because I had an early meeting after a late rise. But those folk who go to the federal parliament in Canberra, they're without their families. It's no surprise to me that you see the disintegration of family units and the breaking up of relationships and much worse activities, in the federal parliament that are currently under the spotlight because of the enormous pressure that the job puts on those people.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's by no means any excuse for bad, unlawful or other behaviour, not in any way, shape or form, but you put people in the crucible of fire, stuff is going to start breaking.
Yeah, you often hear, when politicians make their stepping down speech, it's often to spend more time with their family, and I'm sure it is. I haven't ever heard anyone say, I want to spend more time playing the piano or strumming the guitar. Maybe Peter Garrett, maybe he resigned because he wanted to do more music, but I just think as a musician and as a performer like you are, to not have space in your life to give expression to that. I know when we go on holidays, my wife stopped asking me to not bring a guitar because we'd fill the car, we'd have all the kids' stuff, all the my stuff, we'd have surfboards on the top, and then we'd have this whopping big guitar taking up all this space. Well, I've now got it down to a keyboard, which is about this size. It's only got about 10 notes on it. But when I connect it to my iPad and put my headphones on, I'm in heaven. But whether you're a musician, an artist, or you like working in the garden, we have to do these things which are aesthetic and touch that part of our soul that brings us life. So we can't ever get so busy to a point that we haven't got space for that. It's critical. In fact, we do our best work, I think, on the other side of creativity.
We do. And there's good brain research now that shows how important it is, both brain research and endocrinology research that shows that the feel-good hormones are released when you do something as wonderful as conducting a band or playing a clarinet or surfing. Although I'm not a surfer, but I read it's quite good. And on the neuro research end of the scale, there's some wonderful work at the moment that shows that when you're playing music and learning music, it actually helps your brain to rewire in ways that are helpful to learning in other areas of your life. Dr. Anita Collins has done a lot of this work. And on the back of it, there's a campaign about to commence that's going to promote the interests of music in schools, especially in the early years, because there are studies that'll show that kids who are learning to play a complex instrument, as they call it, but learning to play a wind instrument or the piano or the recorder or to use their voice properly, their brains are wired in such a way that support learning in English and maths. And music is a wonderful source of equity. You bring music into a disadvantaged school, studies have shown that those kids in those disadvantaged schools will start to get better educational outcomes. Go figure. It's not rocket science. We in the 20th century or 21st century, some of us narrowly define what life is about, that it's about making money and maximizing shareholder profit, and we fill our lives with stuff until we get to the age of about 55 and we go, oh my goodness, yes, where has life gone?
Yes. Now, I grabbed my binoculars and my camera this morning and I went off for a bushwalk. I was only going to go for about an hour, but I got drawn in by all the bird life, and 4 hours later I got back home. So it meant I missed 4 hours of work, but gosh, I felt energized by the end of it.
Of course you did.
Well, we're going to play a piece of music now, just a sample of a piece that you wrote, I believe, for a friend who had passed away, that you wrote as a tribute,
yes.
a tribute for them. Well, that is a really beautiful piece of music, Stephen.
The version that you just played, I think, is probably the computerized simulation. I don't have a great recording yet of our concert band doing it.
Mm-hmm.
The hall we rehearse in has trains going past. It's not conducive for recording. Anyway, that's a whole other story. Jeannie Hope died after a long illness that went into remission and then came back with a vengeance. And Jeannie was the assistant director of the Golden Kangaroos, which I conduct. Mm-hmm. So she and I were a team in helping these community-based musicians to be better, their better selves, playing music together. And when she died, it left such a hole. And between the last time I saw her, which was probably a week before she died, and her memorial service a week or so later, I wrote that piece of music. And it not just helped me process, because it actually, the piece tracks the stages of grief.
Yes.
It starts with denial, and then it moves on to anger, and it goes through acceptance, and then it goes to celebration. Mm-hmm. And as I wrote those sections of the music, I was clearly processing each of those stages in a pretty condensed form over a couple of weeks. But listening back to it, I can map where each of those stages is. So a great catharsis.
Yes. I just led a workshop for a humanitarian organisation in the Philippines, and the city of Manila has been hit pretty hard by the pandemic, and these beautiful young adults who work tirelessly for this organisation have been working from home for a very long time, and most of them haven't seen any family members apart from their immediate family, which, if you know Filipinos, must be a very hard sacrifice. And I talk with them about the issue of lament and hope, which really are two sides of the same coin, because if we get stuck in lament, that's not good, but hope, that's just triumphalism, that's not helpful either. We need to own the lament, feel the pain, but also move through the pain. And as you say, music is such a great tool that we have to help us move through. Here's one you might be interested in. I've only been bird watching for 9 months, but I find it absolutely fascinating. And the bird melodies are, now, some people from overseas say that the Australian bush life, is just full of screeches, but it's not. We've got some very melodic birds, and there's there's a bird outside of our place that makes a little sound like did it, did it, did it, did it, did it, did it. And so I just sat at the piano and I did it, did it, did it, did it, and just started playing with that melody. And I found this great source of expression, taking simple bird melodies and designing a composition based on the bird phrasing.
I'm so pleased you're doing that. It is a great tradition in music. Think about The Lark Ascending by Vaughan Williams, one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written in that Western classical tradition. And he's kind of mimicking the lark, and it goes higher and higher and higher and higher on the violin. It's just an amazing piece of music. I wrote a piece once using the sound of a bellbird as a motif.
Yes.
And I did some study into bellbirds, and I went and visited different bellbird colonies around the place, as you do. And I worked out, and I could hear that the pitches were a bit different.
Yeah.
So let's say they're all E flat, but they weren't. It was E flat sharper and a little bit flatter, all different frequencies within what we would call E flat on, say, the piano.
Mm-hmm.
So micro tuning for those, people who are into that. And it turns out that different flocks of bellbirds have their own sort of note or their own tuning of the note.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, so I'm a novice with all this.
Whatever that means, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm pretty keen to get a little bit more into it. Look, can we just finish up perhaps just talking a little bit more about community organisations? Because you're facilitating a whole collection of these groups, and obviously meeting together in the company of people who are like-minded. They're often staffed and facilitated by people who are volunteers. How important are these groups across Australia?
So many things only happen because community-minded people turn up and do them. Imagine what the world would be like without your Rotary clubs and the bushfire brigade or the local brass band, or what would we be like without people who go to churches and do the flowers? That's where the richness often lies in our communities, and people don't often see that. I'd say to you that even as a journalist, my first job, my first career, I didn't appreciate the true depth of what community was until I had the blessing of being an MP and moving amongst those groups and helping them with whatever their latest project was. For that reason, I then started to realize that leadership involved facilitating these people to do what they'd been called to do. Mm-hmm. And I'm a strong believer in calling, as you are, I'm sure. And what a leader needs to do is to try to find a way for the organisation to open the blessings that come when people follow that calling. And even if conflict arises, sometimes it's about my way versus your way, whatever, try to resolve that in terms of the inherent dignity of everybody involved in that enterprise.
My thesis was on this concept of animation, which is coming alongside someone and actually helping to bring to life what is within them. And you can't make it happen. You can't control it. It has to be owned by them. But if you provide the space, if you ask the right questions, if you give the right encouragement, you can see people come into life, come into who they are meant to be. And it's a great privilege to come alongside people in that way. And we need more mentors. And I think when you get into your 50s, perhaps you understand that more than you did when you were younger. Well, Stephen, it gives me great joy to see you at this point in your life, having contributed so much and being passionate about contributing so much in the future. Thank you so much for coming on the Animated Living podcast.
What a gracious conversation. Thank you. I really appreciate what you and I appreciate what you're doing with this podcast.